Welcome. I want to express gratitude to Dorcy Pruter, who brings her lived experience and work toward helping others. Just as I have been helped from the insight of many, including her, I will give back and reflect light and experience the best way I can. I've adapted the following information from a video by Dorcy Pruter that she published yesterday, May 1st, 2026. The references and more information will be at the end. Chapter 1. The important perspective of child protection rather than child custody. So you walked into a courtroom for justice, thinking you were handling a child custody dispute, but you were not. You were looking at a child psychological abuse case, and for a variety of reasons, no one in that courtroom named it correctly. Not the lawyer, or the judge, or the therapist, or the evaluator, who may have been seeing the family for 2 years or more. The following is a clinical and legal guide for what you are looking at in reality, how to better show it, whether in or out of court, and the remedy. An important shift to emphasize in these cases is to correctly address it as a child protection issue rather than a custody one. Those two frameworks produce different outcomes. The custody frame asks, who should the child live with, focusing on the parents. The child protection frame asks, who is harming the child and how do we stop it, focusing on the child. That is, who is really harming the child. Chapter 2. 3 Diagnostic Indicators of Pathogenic Parenting. Dr. Craig Childress identifies in a clinical framework what is called pathogenic parenting. This framework does not ask the court to choose between parents. It asks the court to identify whether a specific form of child psychological abuse is occurring and to respond to the way it would respond in any other form of confirmed child abuse. The framework gives you 3 diagnostic indicators of pathogenic parenting and the correct DSM-5 diagnosis of V995.51, child psychological abuse confirmed. Not parental alienation, not high conflict divorce, not a difficult custody situation. Child psychological abuse confirmed. And child protection is the goal, in or out of a courtroom. Indicator 1 is an attachment system suppression. The child displays a selective, targeted suppression of a normal range functioning of their attachment bonding motivation towards the rejected parent. In plain English, a child who previously had a loving relationship with a parent is now seeking to completely terminate the relationship with no legitimate basis. The second criterion is really important. The targeted rejected parent must be assessed as broadly normal range. If the targeted rejected parent is actually abusive, that is a different clinical situation. It's a differential diagnosis. Many assume when a child says something, or the other parent says something, that that's child abuse, when in reality it is not. Think of the classic fable of the boy who cried wolf. When children are misled or enticed to twist reality, incentivized by rewards, to appease an abusive parent, the consequence is it paints a target on the children to be exploited in life. Wise and ethical adults and professionals can discern what constitutes child abuse and who the abuser is. So while the targeted parent is broadly normal range, Indicator 2 is either a personality disorder of the allied parent or a child's phobic anxiety displayed towards the rejected parent. Oftentimes, both are present. Personality disorder features of the allied parent are grandiosity, absence of empathy, entitlement, arrogant attitude, and splitting. The allied parent will try to project these features of their own onto the target parent and recruit the children to uphold that narrative. And so a target parent's rightful demand for justice, driven by justified indignation, will be framed as arrogant, narcissistic, angry, or unsafe. Splitting is a psychological defense mechanism commonly associated with borderline personality disorder, or BPD, also known as emotionally unstable personality disorder, EUPD. It involves viewing people, situations, oneself, or events in extreme all or nothing, black and white terms, either entirely good or entirely bad, without recognizing nuance, complexity, or middle ground. Splitting is the idolization of one parent as all good, while the other parent is entirely devalued and labeled all bad with no nuance. These features displayed by the child towards the target parent are not normal child behavior. They are clinical symptoms of conditional pathology. The third indicator is fixed and false belief, held by the child regarding fundamental alleged parental inadequacies of the rejected parent. The child or minor is misled to characterize that relationship as emotionally or psychologically abusive without true justification. When all three indicators are present, there's a DSM-5 diagnosis, V995.51, child psychological abuse confirmed. Chapter 3. Why standard custody evaluations fail in court. Child psychological abuse confirmed is the diagnosis, and effective justice requires its recognition. The problem is, most court personnel use standard custody evaluations that are often ineffective at best and exploited for profit at worst. Lawyers are hired to argue cases on either side, and they just follow the money. It is worse when a lawyer stirs or fabricates issues for profit, aware of the mental disorder of their client. Hence the classic negative reputation of lawyers. Standard custody evaluations are an abomination. Dr. Childress advocates against these for years and shows it in his clinical writings. There is very little, if any, scientific validity to the conclusions reached through a standard custody evaluation, which involves data collection followed by conclusions based on subjective clinical judgment. A standard custody evaluation is ineffective and exploitable. Chapter 4. The single-case ABAB reversal design gives you something fundamentally different. It is a scientific, established research protocol with an empirical structure that can establish both causality and treatment efficacies in an individual case. The ABAB single-case design is the research methodology used to evaluate behavioral treatments, such as autism spectrum disorder, for educational interventions. It was favored by the research model of B.F. Skinner, and it has established scientific validity. So the ABAB design gives the court something it has not had before, empirically driven evidence of causality instead of a clinician's opinion. Actual behavioral data collected across structured phases that shows definitively whether the allied parent has influence and the influence is creating the child's symptomatic rejection of the targeted parent. And that evidence is defensible in court in a way that clinical judgment alone is not. Chapter 5. The 4 sequential phases of the ABAB protocol. A1 is the initial baseline period. This is the assessment of the child's behavior, while still being exposed to the pathogenic parent's influence. Daily ratings are collected using relationship rating scales, measuring the child's attitude from hostile to affectionate, cooperative to defiant, and from withdrawn and engaged. This provides a baseline of what the pathogenic parenting looks like in measurable behavior within the child. B1, the second phase, is the initial intervention period. The child is protectively separated from the pathogenic parenting influences of the allied parent. Contact between the allied parent and the child is prohibited during this period, and the intervention begins with the high road to family reunification that can be well openly documented, enabling the option to facilitate and review. The child's behavior is rated daily throughout this period. Then we introduce a second baseline, A2. The protective separation ends, and the child is reintroduced to the court-ordered custody and visitation schedule. Rating the child's behavior continues, and there are two possible outcomes. Either the child remains symptom-free and the conflict is resolved, or the child's symptoms return upon re-exposure of the allied parent's influence, which represents empirically established proof of causality. The symptoms disappearing when the child is separated from the pathogenic parent, and then returning when the child is re-exposed to the parent. That is scientific evidence of causality. B2 is the second intervention period. If the symptoms return, a second protective separation is initiated. This time, the causal relationship is definitively established, and the court has empirical data to support more significant protective orders. For the assessment protocol, the initial intervention period is for 6 successful weeks of cooperative child behavior. For the remedy protocol, when causality has already been established, it is for 12 weeks. So in both cases, the child is empowered to determine the length of the protective separation through their own cooperative behavior. That's child empowerment that really matters in the court. Chapter 6, DSM-5 V995.51, Child Psychological Abuse Confirmed. Many lawyers correctly point out that the term parental alienation has been discredited. The opposition has spent years successfully arguing against it. It is more effective to use the correct clinical language instead, the DSM-5 language, V995.51, Child Psychological Abuse Confirmed, Pathogenic Parenting, Attachment System Suppression, a Fixed and False Belief. These are not contested terms. They are established clinical diagnoses and frameworks that the court has authority to act under the child protection statutes. These frameworks, advanced by Dr. Childress and Dorcy Pruter, give you observable behavioral indicators that translate directly into what a court can document and use. These are observable, reportable behaviors, and the ABAB protocol gives you the empirical structure to show and prove causality in a way that clinical opinion cannot. So when you put all of that together, you're not arguing parental alienation. You are arguing child psychological abuse with the DSM-5 diagnosis, a scientifically established assessment protocol, and a court-ordered remedy with documented efficacy. This information demonstrates a better approach to assessment and intervention, and that is the purpose of Protect First. That is, protect the child first, designed for child custody workers of all types and child protective services who need to quickly and accurately identify when a child is being psychologically abused, when it is occurring, and what to do about it. The framework provides for assessment a well-reasoned checklist that walks the frontline worker through the diagnostic indicators and associated clinical signs in a systematic way that produces a clear determination. And this is helping you discern between a custody issue or a child protection issue, a decision tree based on clinical evidence that provides a valid basis for a court's consideration. For assessment, the worker can have a better path forward, valid and useful data, the DSM-5 diagnosis that supports it, the ABAB single case design protocol that addresses it, and what court orders need to include. That is the shift, away from finger-pointing toward clinical precision, away from the he said, she said, to empirically grounded child protection. And that shift saves children. Professionals like Dorcy Pruter, Dr. Childress, and countless others across the globe implement it every day and work on these cases every day. To protect first, litigate second. When the 3 diagnostic indicators are present and a child is being psychologically abused through the parent-child relationship, the primary obligation of every professional in the courtroom is to create safety for the child, not to manage the conflict between the adults, not to split the difference. The clinical framework exists. The legal language exists. The assessment protocol exists. The proven intervention exists. What has been missing is, on the one hand, education, awareness, training. But just as important, if not more, are proper incentives for action. Incentives lead to outcomes. The right incentives lead to the right outcomes, just as perverse incentives lead to perverse outcomes. It ultimately takes personal agency to keep any system from misuse and corruption. Dorcy's video has more information, readily available on YouTube, titled The Childress Framework, Identifying Pathogenic Parenting in Court, published on May 1st, 2026, which I will link in the description where available. If you are an attorney, a guardian ad litem, a therapist, a court evaluator, or a child protective services worker, a parent or even a child who deserves truth, reality, and justice, you are best served to act with this information. The diagnostic framework provides a useful clinical and legal foundation, the correct DSM-5 language, the real associated clinical signs, and the legal strategy for shifting the narrative from custody dispute to child protection case. Emancipated children need to exercise their freedom, their healthy critical thinking, to course correct from the danger of a chronic, pathological, and dysfunctional regime. Until you see me again, be well, everyone.